My life has always been a balance between family and work, like many mothers. I was proud of my two sons and saw them as my greatest joy and achievement. My husband, though a wonderful and devoted man, stayed late at work more and more often, and over time there was a void between us, like a chasm separating us. It was as if we had become neighbors, not noticing our lives drifting apart. My oldest son, Micky, had just turned 25. I watched him grow from a boy into a confident, intelligent and strong man. I was proud of him, but I also regretted how quickly the years had flown by. Our bond was special. We often found comfort in talking to each other, discussing life, love and the difficulties we faced. Micky became not just a son to me, but a friend to whom I could confide thoughts that even my husband would not tell. Everything changed a few months ago, when Micky decided to stay home for the vacations after school, and my husband and youngest son, Jack, went to my parents' house to help with work. I was left in an empty house, wallowing in the loneliness that seemed to be my eternal companion. I sat in the living room that afternoon, feeling a strange sense of longing. Something was wrong, as if something inside me was waiting to awaken, something I couldn't explain. When Micky entered the room, I looked up and suddenly realized how much he had changed. He didn't just look more mature, there was a strength and maturity about him that I hadn't noticed before. He sat down next to me and we started talking. We laughed, discussed his college life, his friends, and his dreams. But as the conversation deepened, I noticed that I was starting to look at him differently than I ever had before. There was something elusive in his gaze that drew me in. It seemed that every gesture he made, every subtle nuance of his voice, drew me in, awakened in me something unfamiliar and forbidden. I tried to suppress these feelings, convincing myself that it was simply the pride of a mother admiring a son who had grown up and become independent. But the longer we talked, the stronger the attraction became. We were sitting on the couch that night when Micky gently touched my arm. I flinched in surprise, feeling the simple gesture break through my defenses. My heart beat faster, my breathing quickened. I looked up at his face, serious and calm, and there was something in his eyes that I couldn't read. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked softly, his voice sounding like he was reading my mind. Yes, of course, I tried to smile, but I realized that my voice gave me away. We continued talking, but I couldn't focus on the words anymore. Micky continued to hold my hand, his fingers warm and confident. At one point, he pressed it lightly to his lips, and I felt a shiver run through my body. Everything inside me screamed that this was wrong, that I should stop, pull away, but I couldn't. That evening as we sat side by side, I felt the cracks in my outdated marriage begin to turn into gaping chasms, and it was as if something long buried inside of me was suddenly awakened to life. Days passed, and I tried to distance myself from Micky, pretending nothing had happened. But the more I tried to keep my distance, the stronger the attraction I couldn't control became. Our gazes met, and I could feel his presence filling the space around me, consuming me. Nights I lay in bed next to my husband, feeling our marriage becoming something distant and outdated, and I wallowed in thoughts of what was happening between Micky and me. One evening, when we were alone at home again, he came over to me and gently put his arm around my shoulders, and I felt that simple touch awaken something more in me than I wanted to admit. We stood there for a long time without saying a word, but I knew this moment could change everything. My relationship with my husband had long ago become routine, and I suddenly realized that my entire life had been built on compromise and restraint. And here, next to Micky, I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. The continuation of the strange bond that had developed between us seemed to happen on its own, as if against my will. I kept trying to convince myself that it was just maternal pride in my son, that I admired his maturation and strength of character. But no matter how hard I tried, the feeling of something more, something forbidden, something secret, wouldn't let me go. It grew quietly inside, rekindled each time I was in the presence of Micky, who seemed to be around more and more when I needed support. We really began to spend a lot of time together. I don't remember when it started, probably from the moment he came home for the vacations. It was like some force was leading us to each other, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop it. At first it was just innocent conversations, laughter, shared walks, anything that would seem quite normal for a mother and son. But then there was something new and elusive in these moments, as if a thin invisible thread had been stretched between us, turning the usual communication into something more. One evening, when we returned from another walk, Micky suggested we look at old family photos. We went through the albums, remembering moments from the past, and I looked at him and couldn't believe that the grown man next to me was the same little boy I'd held in my arms. We laughed when we found particularly funny pictures, but the more I looked into his eyes, the more uncomfortable I became. They looked at me the same way they had that night on the couch, filled with warmth, understanding, but also something else I couldn't describe. At one point, Micky leaned over to show me something in one of the pictures, and I suddenly felt his breath close. His hand inadvertently touched mine, and I felt something flip in my chest. It was so sudden and sharp that I almost yanked my hand away, but I stopped myself in time, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked suddenly, his voice low and soft, as if it came from far away. "Yes, of course," I answered, though my insides were tight with tension. I forced myself to smile and turn my attention to the other picture to hide my embarrassment. But it was as if Micky knew what was going on inside me. His gaze was intense, scrutinizing, and for the first time I realized that it wasn't a sonly look. From that day on, I started avoiding him. I found any excuse to leave the house when he was there, tried to spend as much time as possible with my youngest son and household chores, just to avoid being alone with Micky. But it was no use. Micky wouldn't leave me alone. He looked for a meeting, came to my room, asked me what he could do for me, offered to go out together. I felt something brewing inside me that I couldn't control. Every night I would toss and turn in bed, trying to get rid of these thoughts. I remembered the moments of our life when Micky was little, his first steps, how he used to hold me before bed. It had been simple and pure then, and I thought it would always be that way. But now I realized that those memories kept me going precisely because things were different now. We were no longer just mother and son, and I didn't know how to get us back together. One night, when we were alone in the living room again, Micky came over to me, and without saying a word, he hugged me. His embrace was strong and warm, and I felt my heart beat faster again. I wanted to push him away, but I couldn't. I realized I was afraid of my feelings, afraid to admit what was already obvious. But the moment I lifted my head to look into his eyes, I saw something in them that made me no longer sure I was doing the right thing. I was torn between my role as a mother and the feelings I should never have had for my own son. I was going grocery shopping, and Micky offered to drive around a bit and help me. We rode in the car, and I tried to keep the conversation light, talking about little things and pretending that nothing special was going on. But as the conversation became more personal, and Micky talked about his views on life, on people, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was like a grown man sitting next to me, not my own son. When he spoke, there was a confidence and maturity in his voice that I hadn't noticed before, and it sent shivers down my spine. His words, his way of talking, and even his gestures fascinated me. At one corner, when we stopped at a stoplight, Micky suddenly put his hand on my shoulder. His touch was unexpected, but warm, and I felt my heart beat faster. He looked at me, his gaze serious and attentive, as if trying to read my thoughts. In that moment, something inside me gave in. I felt an attraction I couldn't deny, and it scared me. We stopped at the side of the road for coffee at a small roadside cafe. Micky offered me his coat when he saw that I was shivering, though the cold wasn't the reason I was shivering at all. I took his coat, smelling the light scent of his cologne, and it made my sensations even more acute. We sat down at a table, and our conversations became deeper than ever. I told him about my experiences, about the loneliness that had become a constant companion in my life. Micky listened attentively, encouraged me, and looked at me in a way that no one else ever had. I felt like there was an invisible connection between us that should never have been there. His presence filled a void I'd tried to ignore for years. When he touched my hand again to hand me the cup, it was almost unbearable. It was as if my whole body was responding to his touch. I tried to pull away, realizing where these feelings were leading. But it was as if Micky had read my mind. He squeezed my hand lightly, and I caught myself looking straight into his eyes. We sat like that for a few long seconds, and I realized I couldn't keep pretending like nothing was happening. This struggle with myself plagued me at night, when I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in bed, remembering every moment of the day. I realized that I had crossed the line and nothing would ever be the same again. And the worst part was that I didn't know how to stop this downward slide. I was afraid to open up to Micky, afraid of ruining everything, but at the same time I was gripped by this new, forbidden feeling that was burning me from the inside out. I even thought about taking sleeping pills, because my nights had become a nightmare. I tried to stay calm, but his words, spoken in such a quiet, deep voice, pierced me to the core. "I love you." It didn't sound like a son's usual confession to his mother, and I couldn't help but feel something far more than just familial affection forming between us. Those words stirred up my own hidden feelings, reawakening memories of those moments when our interactions had been on the edge, those glances that lasted a little longer than they should have, and touches that seemed almost casual but so meaningful. "Micky." I tried to say his name calmly, but my voice shook. I struggled to find the right words to somehow explain to him that this was just an illusion, that his feelings weren't really what he perceived them to be. "You're just confusing things. You're young and you think you have different feelings for me, but you don't." He interrupted me, stepping closer, and I saw something unfamiliar in his eyes: challenge, determination, desire. "No, it's not just my fantasies, Mom," he said, and his words sounded confident, as if he'd made up his mind long ago. "I know you feel the same way. You can deny it all you want, but I see the way you look at me." I froze, feeling a wave of fear and arousal wash over me. He was right. No matter how hard I tried to ignore what was happening, to deny my feelings and convince myself that it was just the effects of loneliness and dissatisfaction in my marriage, I knew deep down that something had changed. Too much had changed, and it was no longer possible to just brush it off. I took a step back, trying to create distance between us, but he moved closer again, his hands gently resting on my shoulders. "You can feel it, can't you?" he whispered, his voice shaking with restrained emotion. I couldn't answer, couldn't find the strength to utter a word. Instead, I just stared at him in silence, unable to look away. The house was silent outside, just the two of us in this room, and it felt like the whole world was frozen with us. My head was spinning, my heart was racing, and I realized I was on the verge of a breakdown. "This isn't right," I whispered, finally finding the strength to speak. "You're my son, Micky. It's all just wrong." But the words sounded hollow, like I couldn't believe what I was saying. He hugged me tighter, and I felt his body tense and his breathing deep and frequent. "Wrong is ignoring your feelings and living a lie, Mom," he whispered, and I felt his lips touch my ear. I sighed convulsively, feeling the struggle inside me between my mind and the incomprehensible, almost forbidden feelings I was trying to deny. I felt like I was about to lose control, like I was going to be swept away in this whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't stop myself. But at the last moment, I pulled away, pushing him away from me and turning away so he wouldn't see the tears on my face. "You have to forget about it," I said, trying to make my voice firm. "We will never speak of this subject again. I'm your mother, and you have to understand that. I must understand that." With those words, I ran out of the room, feeling despair come over me. I knew that I had to talk to my husband urgently, that I needed to reconnect with him to get rid of this emotional void. But even that thought was a small consolation, because part of me had already realized that the moment Micky had looked at me with such love, something important had changed forever.